Words do not build, do not break, do not anger. Words do not love. People love. Words do not forget, do not betray, cannot mask us or hide us from ourselves. And without arms, words do not protect, do not agree. And being just words, they do not shoot. I hate words. They are words of truth. They are not the truth. They are not even lies. They are just words without land. Tsetshwayo was not a man of words, nor was Makado. In fact, Mushwashwe could not even speak. And yet, it was with words that Azania was married with looters in community of no property. And like Gxamza, Umupu Mandela. Ulo wasolo on the west wela netabla pekanda orulo smala ngamasheta tatazelayo othanda ikhulume phethu amaqaqa othanda ama-born free into poverty othanda ondlebe zikanye igazi le-Afrika. Umubi kawo awusekho uxolile isayidi lakho. Mina ngakoli ngisabambe la yasemandulo angeke ngilale nesithi endlini angeke ngihleke nesekaliphethe ngokwami ngixolela abantu abangaxolisanga mina ngihlanye anginandaba nepeace mina ipeace ikalilayitha ugesi ulayithwa Eskom makathanda anginandaba ne-food security mina ngilambe kumanje usiyakolisi vele ngiyamfrostana but I cannot spring a bog mina. I cannot die inside a square. I cannot kiss a bua or toy and dance to the same song. I do not want to white anymore. I do not want to shosholoza anymore or constitutionally prostitute my birthright for Hong Kong rainbows with no whites. Just wilting black rays across the sky of stolen treasures. I do not want to white anymore. I do not want to blood-based empowerment anymore. I do not want to tender or plead on behalf of thieves to Rupert over step wounds, to dig treasures while singing your song of a piece of poverty amidst the rhythm of barricada bullets dancing inside my skull in a country about a movie built on magic. I do not want to white anymore. I do not want to rainbow without bread. I do not want to hate Cecil and Anthem with his children, to shoot off Mayor and dance to Mikasa, to burn sparrows and mourn the deaths of Cleggs, to hate Eugene and thank Slovo, to joke and beg, to smile at my killer, to forgive while bleeding. I do not want to Musi and Malima anymore, or reconcile from inside between coffins, to chop for your song, to slave for your fund, your shirt, your dance, your club captain smile, your promise, your Madiba magic. I've buried it to the bones of my brothers in a shallow grave under the sweltering heat of the southern Maracana sky, because words do not break chains, Tata. I do not want to South Africa anymore. I want to Azania of no words, of death, of birth, and learning white poison, white demons drowning in the Atlantic. Azania of exploding colonial bondages. Azania of no words, of no prayer, of no fist in the air anymore. Azania of beaming black smiles. Azania of beaming black bullets. Black, beautiful, and borderless. I do not want white anymore. Africa Makaya
Good evening, Africa comrades and friends. Good afternoon to our viewers in the United Kingdom, and also good morning to our viewers in the United States of America. One more time, your host and your moderator and facilitator of this 62nd webinar series of the founding of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, Thandolwethu Dlanga, from Gerald Kondlo branch in Tshwane occupied Azania. One more time, Africa and comrades and friends, we are coming and we are bringing you two great guests that are going to be dissecting and evaluating the 27th April Freedom Day phenomenon in occupied Azania. At this moment, Africa, let me welcome our two guests, Reverend Gxamza. Good evening, Mfundisi. How are you doing?
Thank you very much to you, Thandolwethu, and the fellow panelists. I greet all the sons and daughters of Africa across the length and the breadth of our country, continent, and those in the diaspora, saying to all of you, Izwelithu.
Africa, Mfundisi. To you, Comrade Malusi, good evening, Africa.
Good evening, comrades and friends in Azania, in Africa, in the African diaspora, and the rest of the struggling working class of the world. Let me allow to say Izwelithu.
Thank you very much, Africa Omhle. We appreciate you, colleagues, for coming through. To the viewers at home, we've got these great guests, and without wasting any more time, Africa, to our viewers at home, we are telling you that once again, to access this live webinar, you can go to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter with the link at MyPAC Online. You will be able to make your contributions, and you will be able to view it, and you will be able to ask your questions. And we are asking all the viewers at home to make their comments on the comments box and make it easy for us to take those questions. The structure of the session today is going to be like this. We are going to do a 15-minute each presentation of each discussant. We're going to start with Mfundisi Gxamza, and then after that we will then take Comrade Malusi. Just a brief profile of our guests. This is what Mfundisi Gxamza is. He is currently serving as a senior minister at Calvary Methodist Church in Midrand, Johannesburg. He is an admirer and a student of history, religion, politics, and philosophy. Gxamza undertook his elementary education in what was known as Port Elizabeth, now known as Gqeberha. He possesses a university qualification of a Bachelor of Theology and an Honours Bachelor of Theology as well from the University of Fort Hare. And he is currently doing his Master's in the History of Christianity. University of Fort Hare is known to have produced a large number of Pan-Africanist thought leaders over the past many years. And on the other side, we've got Africa's Thembiso Manifesto Malusi, who is the current serving chairperson of the PAC TM Dantala region in the Eastern Cape. Comrade Thembiso joined the PAC cell at the University of Transkei, currently known as WUSU, in the early 1989. In the same year, he joined Pan-Africanist Student Organization, PASO. In 1990, he was elected into the UNITRA Unit Executive Committee, and the following year, 1991, was elected to the Mthatha branch as chairperson of the student movement. In 1996, he was elected to lead the revival of the Azania as president at the UNITRA Congress. And as you have heard, Africa, he's currently serving as the chairperson of the TM Dandala region. So we've got people who are coming from within the belly of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and also within the Pan-Africanist thought in the name of Africa, Fundisi, Reverend Gxamza. Thank you for that, comrades. Quickly, Africa, we need to understand that the birth of South Africa came as a result of an antagonism between the Dutch and British settlers, which at some point resulted in what was called Anglo-Boer War of 1899 and 1902. The perpetrators of this war, finally, when they saw that they are not winning against each other, they met at Vereeniging for a treaty which they signed in 1902 and resolved to unite the territories which they were fighting over. The Boers, who were later to be known as Afrikaners, one of the reasons why they accepted this treaty was that they did not want to be, one of the reasons was that they accused the Africans of siding with the British in the war, but also they saw that the Kafir question was becoming a dangerous problem for them. So therefore, in the treaty, the Afrikaners wanted self-government, and the self-government meant that they are going to be governing the Transvaal and the Orange River colonies, considering that the Transvaal, they had already discovered diamonds in 1867. This also, they wanted to run away from dealing with the issue of the native question in the Cape, so that is why they also looked at those territories. By 1908, 10 years after the Anglo-Boer War, a national convention was held in Durban, which included the Europeans only, who were then at war at each other, who united to form a government that excluded the indigenous Africans. And on the debate of that particular convention was the issue of a unitary state or a federal state. Federalism won the day. Afrikaners maintained their self-government, and the British also maintained their own part of the Cape Colony. The convention drafted a bill that was endorsed by 4 colonial parliaments, and it was later sent to Britain to assent by the Imperial Parliament. 1909, 19 August, the House of Commons passed the bill, and the bill was then known as South Africa Act of 1909. And the first constitution was developed, and South Africa was born. The African leaders at the time kept on petitioning, but they were never listened to. This act produced and introduced the color line in respect of political rights and privileges in what was called South Africa. In this constitution, it was this constitution preamble had these summaries. I quote, "It is desirable for the welfare and the future of progress of South Africa that several British colonies be united under one government in a legislative union under the crown of the Great Britain and Ireland." 2, it further proclaimed that colonies mentioned shall be original provinces. So South Africa was the province, had 4 provinces, the Cape of Good Hope, Natal, Transvaal, and what would be later called Orange Free State. And in this constitution, there was Pretoria, which shall be regarded as the seat of government, and Cape Town, the seat of the legislature. And it also claimed that the members of parliament will be white males from 21 years of age. And therefore, with this background that I'm showing you, contrary to popular belief that South Africa is a former British colony that never denounced or changed its name like other British colonies, it is true that this has never taken place. Like in Ghana, which was Gold Coast, they changed the name to Ghana. Rhodesia changed and became Zimbabwe, but South Africa remains South Africa. The colonial inscription of government seats and the legislatures of the 1909 Constitution still maintain that Pretoria is the seat of government, and Cape Town is that of the legislature. Article 45 of South African Act of 1909 still states that the term of office of the government or assembly will be 5 years. And post 1994, we still find the National Assembly still sits for 5 years. So the Union of South Africa that was established on 10th of May, 1910 was also introduced it was also introduced to us, a Republic of South Africa in 31 May 1961. And later, the new South Africa, in the names of the 1994 South Africa, it was also established in 10 of May 1994. And the latest administration of South Africa under the Ramaphosa administration was also inaugurated in May 2019. All these links are trying to show that South Africa has always maintained a certain position in relation to its colonial and apartheid historical history. At this moment, Africa, I see that we have lost due to network or Comrade Malusi, but we're hoping that he's going to come in. At this time, Mfundisi, with this background that I've given here, we're giving you 15 minutes to make your submission on this great topic that we're engaging on, evaluating the 27th April Freedom Day phenomena in South Africa. Up to you, Mfundisi, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Thando Lwethu. Once again, I also want to take this time yet again to acknowledge and greet all the viewers, the sons and the daughters of Africa who have joined us this evening on different platforms. I also wish to thank you and thank the Pan-Africanist Congress of the People of Azania for this great honor. I have known few greater honors in my life than an honor of contributing to a well of knowledge where most of us, if not all of us, drink from. I'm particularly happy and excited this evening because I look at this as an honor to one of our late preachers, Prof. Mangaliso Usobukwe, who himself was a Methodist, and another giant which we rarely talk about, but I have seen some discussions to honor his contribution, Ndade Philip Hosana, who by the time he passed on, he was a deacon in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. And so it is indeed an honor, and I say this without any fear of contradiction, that having had an opportunity during my probation years to spend time each year for 3 years, a week with Ndade Hosana at Mseni Retreat Center, I must say I drank from that calabash of wisdom. And I do want to also encourage the Pan-Africanist Congress of the People of Azania to really continue to forge working relationships with the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, because I cannot imagine a Pan-Africanist that is not a Methodist. After all, our vision as the Methodist Church has taken a Pan-Africanist posture, for we are a church that is driven by a vision of a Christ-healed Africa for the healing of nations. So I hope that this engagement will mark the beginning of a long and a fruitful relationship between these two very great institutions. And you might also realize, maybe later as we converse, how we have influenced each other, the ability of a creative tension between what is spiritual and material, how at times they go together. One gives a clear and a proper definition in terms of tangible evidence of the other. And so in my submission this evening, Thando Lwethu, I have structured this submission into 3 segments. I will strive first and primarily to define what freedom is as I understand it from my own background and from my own school of thought and from my own spirituality. And then I wish to attempt to look into what is the true test of freedom. What is the true test? And the last item of or segment of my submission will be what I have titled negative peace or negative freedom. And if I spend more time on one aspect, I will appreciate it if you indicate that my time is coming to an end. Freedom as a point of genesis, Thando Lwethu, is in itself a compounded entity. And without wasting your time, I define freedom as something that in nature is spiritual, but it is better explained through tangible or material evidence or gains. I want to align this definition of freedom with what one of the founding fathers, Professor Mangaliso Sobukwe, said at one instance, that we are fighting for a right to call our souls our own. And so I also want to elaborate and go further by saying that it is in its nature a creative struggle for humanity and human dignity. In other words, a right to call our souls our own. Are we together? Now, hence I submit and say to you that it is a spiritual entity, even though I make this point that it can be better seen or explained through tangible evidence, what at some point we will call, as we gravitate towards the end, the material gains or material interests of the African people. But on this statement alone, you can agree, I'm sure you agree with me that this was a hallmark of the essence of the spirituality of the ideology of the Pan-Africanist Congress. You know, one of the early church fathers, Saint Augustine, an African early church father, once said that thou art created us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in thee. In trying to emphasize from where I come from, that freedom is in us, is inborn. It is a God-given right. Are we together? Now, it is in us. In fact, the fact that people almost each and every day wake up and go and you know, demonstrate in the streets is in itself an indication of this deep thirst and hunger, which is part of who we are, part of our DNA. Hence, I say to you that freedom correctly defined, it is a spiritual entity, even though it is better explained through what is tangible. In other words, there are dimensions that may assist us to explain what freedom is. And those dimensions are what you, as the Pan-Africanist Congress of the people of Azania, said that you have engaged in a struggle for. And those are the spiritual interest, mental, moral, and cultural, and even social interest and aspirations of the African people. I'm sure you have noted that I have used two very important terms, interests and aspirations. Are we together? But those are what assists us to evaluate and explain what freedom is. Why am I saying that? Because once freedom is taken away from you, I am referencing the book of Daniel chapter 1 on this instance, when King Gxamza went into Judah to capture the people of Judah and enslave them. One of the critical things, in fact, if you follow the pattern and the system that he used as he was separating Daniel, applying what was later called the rule of divide and rule. But the point that I want to come to is that once freedom is taken away, it has spiritual, mental, psychological, and social effects. That is why I say it is better explained when you look at the dimensions of what constitute what freedom is. And so I say, if you take a holistic approach, I align this argument with the first book of Daniel. Maybe if we get time, we will come back to that. And I want to move quickly to the second segment, which I have said is the true test of freedom. There is a German activist by the name of Gilles Rousseau, please excuse my pronunciation, who reflected on the obscure relations between humanity, who wrote on what he termed a social contract. He emphasizes the point that I have made on my opening remarks, where he says, all men, by men in liberating the language, he means it refers to humanity, are born free and are born equal. But everywhere you go, you see men in chains. I'm coming to this point of what is the true test of freedom. Ninama Africa, you will be the best people to help us on this one. Because your struggle, the struggle of the people of Azania, the occupied Azania, was never about the human rights or what is called social justice or of any nature or kind. But it was and still is about humanity and human dignity. Are we together? So my true test, as I submit to you, of freedom from where I come from, is what is commonly referred to as self-determination. In other words, being a master of your own destiny. Are we together? Now, the book of Genesis, from the very beginning of the story of the Bible, God gave us the divine instruction as humanity, go out and subdue the land. Even before we were given that divine instruction, it was God who, after creating everything, all forms and systems of provision, then God created a human being and gave him dominion over all living creatures. And I say the true test of freedom, the true test is that of being a master of your own destiny. In other words, the right of self-determination. Are we together? You know, one of your founding documents, Thando Lwethu, says the logic of our policies will flow from the concrete material conditions to the long-term fundamental interests of the African people. Are we together? Now, I'm trying to emphasize this point, that freedom, its true test, can only be seen through the segments that I have highlighted earlier, which are spiritual, material, cultural, social interests and aspirations of the African people. Are we together? Where we can be masters of our own destinies. I am not blind to the reality and the fact, coming to your opening remarks, that complete freedom and complete liberation is about getting or restoring the land of the dispossessed masses of Africa. Why am I saying that? Because the primary point of contradiction of colonization was land dispossession. And therefore, you can never self-determine if you have no dominion or a right that is sui generis in its kind over the land. Hence, Africans, those who are pro-Africans, have submitted that no black man can ever be racist because we have no land. The poet who you used earlier was correct when he said that the primary contradiction of the struggle was land dispossession. I hail all the way from the Eastern Cape. There were battles at what were referred to, the historian calls the frontier wars. Those were about the land, not a right to vote, not a right to sit in parliament, but was about the land of the African people. I always make this point that God was not mad when God placed us here in this spot. And one of our flaws, which makes it difficult to respond to your question of freedom. Freedom, in getting to the last aspect of my submission, which is negative freedom. Our freedom, Thando Lwethu, was founded upon wrong principles. And it is unfortunate that we are not courageous enough to face the truth and the reality. Sobukwe warned you as early as the Pan-African, in fact, when he was still an active member of the African National Congress, that you need to be able to distinguish between collaboration and cooperation. Because collaboration and cooperation are two different concepts. One can only be done by equals. This should also give you an idea of how I view the negotiations. Because you cannot negotiate from a point of weakness. You can only negotiate. In fact, I have made this point last week in one of my sermons. What were the African people doing negotiating when the land had not been returned? Because it was never about a right to vote. Hence, I say, this which you call freedom, I call it negative freedom, because it is founded upon wrong principles, upon wrong, what you will call values, because this is a negotiated arrangement. If time allows later, I would like to touch on three very important, but later, what I mean by economic freedom, intellectual freedom, and moral freedom. Thank you very much.
Do that. Thank you very much, Mfundisi. That is the advantage of having the preacher on the program, and that is the advantage. And I'm sure that you could see and you could feel the fire of the clergy there trying to unpacking for us some important elements of his presentation, and he makes some good insights when he talks about the location of freedom. That is, freedom, you have to locate it somewhere, and he talks about the dimensions of freedom. One of them being the spiritual aspect, second one being the social, and also he makes mention at a later stage the material basis of the material interest and aspirations of the African people. And what he draws on is that what Sobukwe was saying as early as in the 50s, when he said, people think that politics is about race and color, but the politics that we seek is about the material and spiritual interests and aspirations of the African people. But secondly, Mfundisi talks about the difference between the fight for human rights and human dignity, which I want him to highlight that point, because I want to interrogate him on that particular aspect. Mfundisi, I want you to highlight that. We might ask that question later, and we want you to ponder on that. And another point that Mfundisi is mentioning is that the freedom was not about the flags and also the national anthem and the right to vote only. It is for this reason that our opening song was saying that I cannot be jumping with a springbuck, and I cannot be hating Cecil John Rhodes, but singing the same national anthem with his descendants. It doesn't make sense. And lastly, one thing that I have found and saw it important was his juxtaposition of collaboration with cooperation. These are very critical points when he talks to the issue of freedom. So these are part of the things that might be important in looking at this. And I see that Mr. Mpofu is also raising a point there that I hope the Reverend doesn't forget to evaluate the so-called 27th April freedom of South Africa, which the people of Azania haven't enjoyed, but is being continuously enjoyed by the same oppressors and the new few black elites. We will engage on that at a at a later stage. Africa, we are also having a problem now again with the internet connection of our other guest, Africa's Thembiso Malus. Seemingly, the urban metropolitans have got a beautiful internet connection than the peripheral municipalities and the peripheral areas of Azania. And again, this shows the approach with which the type of freedom that we are so-called having. Some people are enjoying it more than the others. So at this moment, while we are waiting for the Reverend, I would like to give them Mfundisi to briefly engage on those aspects that he wanted to engage on, so that we don't waste time. Continue, Mfundisi, on the parts that you wanted to talk to, so that we move from that fashion. Thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry. You know, I did mention that I was from Perth, so sometimes I talk without unmuting myself. And thank you very much for the points that have been raised. And but before I get to them, let me begin from where I left off. When I hope the point that I am making, that the holistic, what I have earlier referred to as a creative tension between physical, material, and spiritual, and at times cognitively, which I look and I appreciate about the thinking of the founding fathers of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. And because the reason I say I appreciate them, because it has also influenced our thinking, in particular as the Methodist people. But the point that I wanted to raise is that freedom, whilst I submit that it is a spiritual entity, the test of freedom, by spiritual entity, I'm trying to make a submission of a holistic kind of an approach. Because freedom is not designed really for trees, to you know, in the lack of a better example, but for humanity. And it can be only, and what makes a human being a complete whole is that some argue that we are dichotomous. I submit that we are trichotomous. We are body, spirit, and soul. Are we together? Now, the true test is on issues and aspects such as economic freedom, intellectual freedom, and moral. I will come back to the issue of spiritual freedom. But by economic, from the book, the very book of Genesis, when we were born, when we were created, I beg your pardon, God said, a human being shall eat the sweat of thy brow. Are we together? Now, freedom is supposedly in nature to create a conducive environment for us to be engaged in gainful employment. Are we together? If that is what would make us to be able to put food on the table. But this one that we have in South Africa is the kind that produces graduates who each and every day, especially here in Johannesburg, they stand next to traffic lights asking to be employed. Graduates. This is the nature of this freedom. And I do not want to believe that people want to live out of handouts. It is not in the human nature to want to be given things for free. And I think one of the mistakes in the principles that I think Isidore Sangara makes this point very critically when he says that freedom can never be negotiated. It needs to be won in a battlefield. Are we together? Now, so if you talk of freedom with me, we might be moving from different dimensions, because I do not look at this freedom as what I understand freedom to be. And do not think I'm encouraging the spirit of war. But even if I am doing so, I'm justified by the book of Exodus chapter 15 verse 3. After God led the Israelites out, it was God, it was Moses who sang a song with his sister and exclaimed and celebrated that God is a man of war or a warrior. In fact, iBhayibhile yesiXhosa puts it more eloquent than I can ever master when it says, uYehova uyindoda elwayo. And again, I would want us to be. But second, intellectual freedom. This is the area that the contribution of Black consciousness and the generation of Biko. You know, one of the things that they realized, which you will find in the book of Exodus as the strategy of domesticating people, was that when the Israelites were taken, Daniel in particular, with his friends, one of the things that were done, they were separated from the entire community, from other slaves. Not only were they separated, they were subjected to an amplitude test to check their IQ. And later on, they were given food from the table. Are we together? And note that they were not eating at the table. They were given food. Now I want to assume, using a hermeneutic of suspicion, that they were fed from the leftovers. Are we together? But what they aimed at doing, the king, was so that he can indoctrinate them. Are we together? So that they can later be the buffer zone between the slaves and the masters. If you read the dynasty of the Oppenheimers, you will get this point that I'm making. It's made there by Harry Oppenheimer, the father of this other Oppenheimer, who said there is a need to bring in a middle class Black people that will be socialized to appreciate the white and what they termed civilization. But those were to be gatekeepers and the buffer zone between, are we together, the oppressed, the dispossessed, and the dispossessor. So this is the area that Ubiko and his generation, the protege of your founding president, Ubawu Sobukwe, it is said that when he saw him in one occasion, he exclaimed that the God of the African people is amongst us today. So that's how the relationship that they had. But one of the things that Ubiko said was that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor was the mind of the oppressed. And I submit that you corrupt the spirit so that you can also move on to corrupt the mind. And that will translate into actions. And so what kind of a freedom gives education? I'm talking about intellectual freedom, gives people education that makes them to want to be enslaved by other people. In fact, I always wonder, if you look at the state capture, what kind of an education produces thieves and people who are proud of thievery? The last item, you know, Galton, no, I beg your pardon, From makes this point, says, a man is free only if he can choose. He can choose only if he knows enough to compare. That speaks to the intellectual freedom and the challenge of ignorance. The last item, moral freedom. You know, it is From again who says a man can be free if he has an ideal which makes it possible for him to have a coherent activity. Do you remember in the year 1949, on the 21st of October, the year of the Lord 1949, at the University of Fort Hare, what the founding president of the Pan-Africanist Congress said as he was addressing the students. He said, we all have a mission, a nation to build we have, a God to glorify, and a contribution clear to make towards the blessing of humankind. Stressing this point that I am making, that a man can only be free morally when he is guided by an ideal. I remember that the oppressive government once said about Sobukwe that he approached the issue of struggle as though he has got a divine mandate, and indeed he had a divine mandate. But we've got something, in fact, on an interview that he had about 3 months before the inauguration of the Pan-Africanist Congress of the people of Azania, he made this point that he understands the mission and the struggle he's engaged in as that of providing an ideal that is higher than ethnic loyalties, but something that is greater than our different ethnic loyalties, but that will contribute to the life and the betterment of an African people.
Ibambe mfundisi wami, if besizafaka ingoma sithi faka uhim othile ba uliza lisidinga lakho mhlambi kaba usobukwe besavele sifake yena. Thank you very much, sir, for that contribution. It has proven to be a very great. Now we are going to move into a different approach because now we are going to talk the real things of how is this, why is this freedom problematic, and I'm going to raise this thing because majority of people on the chart are saying, one, freedom we have is not working for the masses of our people, but it works for the few elites. And Usanele Godlimbi is saying people still ought to organize and agree on the best vehicle which can be used to usher them into the real freedom. And that will benefit the majority as opposed to what we are currently having. Now, what are the principles? What are the things, practically so, Fundis, that the masses can do, considering that the type of freedom that we have is a freedom that was agreed upon by a few people who were never elected by the people, by the way. Now, what is a true and a practical thing that can be done, especially by people who understand the spiritual dimension of freedom?
My brother, the first thing that needs to be done is to overthrow the neo-colonial government. You know, because, look, the first thing that we need as African people, we need land so that we can have sovereignty and dominion over it. Are we together? Because it was Mugabe who said, ours is an agrarian reform. Everything else comes from and out of the land. Even though Nkuruma may have said earlier that seek ye first political freedom and the rest, perhaps the time has come to say, seek ye first the land. And I do not believe, my brother, with all honesty, God being my witness. Let's take a freedom like the situation of a bully at school. Now, you can never negotiate with your bully. You need to take your power back yourself. Are we together? Now, you cannot at any given time. You know, and the African people must face the reality and the honesty that the people that are leading us today, they are the enemies of the people. The actual enemies are the thieves that we elect, and from time to time they come and flex their muscle. For an example, now we're going to be receiving them in numbers as we gravitate towards elections, come to flex their muscle, when in fact they do not have the people's best interest at heart. But how can they have? In fact, it was your deputy president, Umantashe, who once said that they sit in parliament legislating poverty, because what else can they legislate? Are we together? What else can they legislate? Now, the people, this notion, it was Roborogo who told you earlier than Musenege could write about it, that we are our own liberators. Take this example of a bully. You can never. That will be negative peace if you and your bully or your parents or a teacher, intervene between you and your bully. But you need to get to a point where you stand up on your own and take your own freedom, because that is not something that can be negotiated. People are their own liberators. And once we begin to conscientize our people, because I think we are where we are because of a systematic design by the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Do you know that? Did you see the man that was pulled out of a shack in Cape Town, dehumanized by the government of the people, for the people? In Cape Town, it's even worse. Thank you.
Yes. I want to interrogate something there, exactly there, of that dehumanization. Here, I'm reading a text. It says, to construct, because I want to ask you this question. It says, to construct a new nation, the aim was to signify a kind of multiculturalism. So the 1994 settlement and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to construct a new nation, the aim was to signify a kind of multiracialism, reconciliation, the supremacy of the Constitution, democracy, and, I quote, inclusive human community, close quote. That being the latter, being an organizing principle of Desmond Tutu's thought and activity. And I'm saying I'm raising this name and this thinking of inclusive human community deliberately so. How do you therefore view the approach with which the likes of the TRC, with its clergy at the top of its as its leader, in interpreting the inclusive human community? If you, Mfundis, as a clergy, you are claiming that there has been no freedom in this country as we understand it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, I really appreciate the point that you have raised, especially about the clergy. Shem Kosiam, as the people of the cloth, we like peace and harmony, and you know the bourgeois has an ability of using, and I feel and I believe that they were used. They were used because they were not given, I am sure, the correct, outline of what, was to be the outcome. And so I think it was a fake. The negotiate that thing that they had, it was a fake. It was phony. In itself, it was corrupt. Are we together? I'm not missing my words when I talk about the issue of the negotiation. It was because there is a gentleman in Kenya by the name of Tom Mboya, the late Tom Mboya. I don't know how many of Africans know him, but he was assassinated. And he made a very critical point in an interview with the British media, that it will only make sense to us, the democracy, if it is founded upon African principles and values. And he said that we are clan-minded, and by so doing, we are communal-minded, and we are notoriously spiritual as the African people. I think John S. Mbiti also made that point elsewhere. But the point that he was making was that, look, we have got systems and structures that we know that work for us. For an example, he said we acknowledge, we have always acknowledged that there is a divine being, that before we go and plow, we pay homage. One of the things, the challenges of the freedom, of the democracy, as you call it, is that it is founded upon capitalist principles. Are we together? I spoke at the University of KwaZulu-Natal about social justice, and I made this point that what is social justice? Because social justice is a capitalist term which says, let us reform. In other words, let us work the outer part, when the essence at the core, yes, now that democracy is a capitalist concept, the one, especially the one that we have, that is not for the people, is not aimed for the people. I'm not sure if I'm assisting.
No, and thanks, Mfundisi. The last question that I have on the clergy, before we go to the comments on Facebook, it relates to this metaphor of religious connotations, because as we understand it, when it came about, the TRC used in 1996 the Rainbow Nation connotation with whatever that it conceived us as a rainbow people of God. And you, as the clergy, you probably understood it very well and better. Where does this phenomenon of this rainbowism and rainbow nation comes from? And what is your critique of that particular usage of the metaphor of rainbow nation in the context of freedom in the case of South Africa? Your critique of that, your understanding of it, and then we quickly move into the comments and questions on the group.
Thank you very much. As much as I would want to absolve the church, but there are really instances where I cannot, even if I want to. The concept of a rainbow nation is an apocalyptic concept. Are we together? Apocalyptic concept. Go to the book of Revelations, chapter 7. Is it chapter 7? Yes, from verse 9 to verse 13, where it will tell you of a great multitude that was before God, and that great multitude was living happily ever after. It goes further also to say, as they were singing praises and glory to God, there is a part which I know influenced this idea, where it says they no longer hunger, they no longer thirst, because the man who is the Prince of Peace at the center was a providence to them. And this has been the obscurity of religion and the critique that we need to make without missing our term, our words. That for centuries, ever since God only knows when, religion has always been used by the establishment against the people, and also to instill and inculcate a culture of fear. If you want to understand this very clearly, go to the letter that was written by the Belgian constitutional monarch to the missionaries in the DRC, where he said to them, remember that your role is to work as administrators. Yours is to make the African people never think or wish to own the things that we own. Use scriptures such as Matthew chapter 5 and say, blessed is the poor, because they will be rewarded in heaven. The pie in the sky kind of a theology when I die. And I always make this point that we mustn't fool ourselves and think that these people came here, the missionaries, I'm referring to the missionaries, the church now, that they came here to evangelize or to spread the gospel as per the Great Commission that says, take the gospel to the very ends of the world. No! I'm a Methodist. We trace our roots in Britain. We are as a result of the 1820 British settlers. William Shaw, who is celebrated as a missionary, was only 21 years old. They were sent here because they were in a quest looking for markets, and the British government made a provision of a spiritual person, leader, or a chaplain amongst them. So originally, fundamentally, they were not here for us or even to spread. They were here for themselves. Are we together? And we need to be honest about that. Yeah,
thank you for that, Mfundisi. And you've driven the conversation thus far. Viewers at home, you can see that Comrade Malusi is back, and he has been struggling with his connection. At this moment, let us give him to make his presentation, and we'll take it from there. I know that I had promised that we are going to be moving to the comments and questions section, but it is important that we give Africa as sufficient time as possible. Let us move over to you, Africa's Tembis.
Yeah, it's only two numbers.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll try to be short as much as possible. I won't belabor on a number of facts that I would have raised. See, had I have time, with the audience. It is a fact that this day, the 27th of April.
Just a little
yes.
bit, just a little bit, Maverick. Can you just adjust your camera properly, the way that we had asked earlier? Is it possible to do that?
I have done that.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Thanks, John.
Okay, now.
Just get forward a little bit. Forward a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Sharp.
Yes, I was saying it is a fact that the 27th of April in 1994 is a very important day in the social history of the country because the millions of Tanzanians went out excited because they were sold a hope of freedom, a hope of a better life, a hope of jobs, a hope of free education, a hope of a quality healthcare system, a hope that poverty will be eradicated, a hope that they will have access to their land, the hope that they will retain their dignity. See, that is the false hope that they were sold. Because those were engineered this day, those were part of the CODESA 1, CODESA 2, and other secret talks that took place before that, for the whole decade from 1980 until 1990. They knew from the very beginning that there would never be freedom, say, for the ordinary people, say, in this country. See, over and above that, this phenomenon of the Freedom Day in this country was part of another orchestrated move to create some sort of a uniqueness of about South Africa, a South Africanism that was supposed to exclude Tanzania, say, from the rest of the continent, creating a parallelism against a Pan-Africanist idea of Africa's Liberation Day, which we commemorate and celebrate on the 25th of May. See, it was a calculated move to dislodge, you see, the Tanzanian masses from being part of a collective, see, that would continue to yearn for united Africa, to continue to push for unification of Africa under a socialist dispensation, a commitment to eradicate imperialism on the continent, a commitment to continue to fight for the eradication of exploitation of person by person, see, in this country, on the continent, and the rest of the world. See, the whole, when you sit down now, 27 years later, we're able to say we are not even smelling freedom. We're not even going to taste freedom. See, the freedom, it was just an illusion. The political magicians who termed this thing Madiba magic, see, they were aware that they were selling an illusion. An illusion remains an illusion. See, there's no freedom in this country. See, we couldn't have freedom without overthrowing white supremacy. We could not attain freedom without overthrowing capitalism. We could not attain freedom without creating a new base, see, for a new life in abundance. That's Sobukwe promised us. See, that the founders of this movement, see, promised the Tanzanian masses. Isolate.
Africa, Johnny. Thank you very much, Wena Nobusan. It seems like you are clearly saying what Umfundisi has just been saying. He talked about an apocalyptic moment or an apocalyptic concept, some form of a baze bahlala bonke bonwabile. Everything was then fine. When you are talking about this orchestrated illusion, especially when it is linked to Rainbow Nation and rainbowism as well. How was it important? How is it important that this Azanian theory or this Azanian thought and this Azanian focus on freedom, how is it important, or why was it so important that it be excluded in the so-called freedom of South Africa? Why was this so important to the imperialists?
Yeah, certainly it was important because from the very word go, as Pan-Africanists in Tanzania, we had pointed to that the social milieu we find ourselves in, see, in this country is as a result of the expansion, of the commercial enterprise, of Europe. We are part of the grand plan of imperialism. When we said we want to eradicate white domination as manifesting itself in this country as part of the broad imperialism, we became a dangerous entity in the grand scheme of things. When we say Africa for Africans, and with everything reclaim our land, the soil, the minerals, the seas, the rivers, and everything around it, we became a threat. It became a very dangerous thing. It could never be sustained. This is why it was very important that a new agency had to be found. That would deliver us towards an illusion and away from the quest for freedom. Is all that.
Yeah. Yeah, as a unionist or a former unionist and a political activist, and also coming from the ranks of APLA, Umfundisi is talking about as a clergy. He says there's a difference between human rights and human dignity, and also the fight which the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania over the 62 years of its existence has never been about the right to vote, a flag, and an integrated anthem. What is your view in that point in relation to the Freedom Day as we understand it today in occupied Azania?
As a former combatant in the Azania People's Liberation Army, ours has always been that the armed struggle was a catalyst, but it was never going to be the final weapon. We had faith in the mass power of the Azanian people. We had to ensure that we reinforce that. But in the words of Sobukwa to say, the freedom that we're always prepared to die for, is the freedom that we're prepared to kill for, because it is in defense of the African masses. It has always been within that context that our founding fathers said, ours is to liberate humanity. It is not only about the Azanian scope. It was for us to deliver the human race. It has always been about that. It has never been about voting. Voting is not equal to democracy anyway. It is just to give the masses, a belief that they can change things. But in reality, the freedom that you don't earn from the battlefield, the freedom you don't earn from the mass struggles, can never be sustained. Voting, it is never going to replace the fight for democracy. It's not going to replace the fight for real freedom. Is all that.
Yes, thank you for that, Mfundisi. And now that you, Mafrika Stembis, thank you for that point of clarity. Just now that you are talking about we're approaching the local elections, which is part of the liberal democracy that we're living in. And a majority of people have been thinking and are saying that we have been liberated by the African National Congress. And what is your view in that? Because there is a young man who was born just at the dawn of democracy. He says that it's an illusion to claim that the South Africa was liberated by the ANC. How would you make a comment on this point of, he says it's an illusion? What is your view on that illusion, if it is an illusion or it is a reality?
Probably we need to retrace the path of the African National Congress. From 1912, 1925, 1955, you go on and go and go on. They've never fought for liberation anyway. And probably it's to credit them when you say probably they betrayed the struggle, because they were never part of the struggle anyway. They've always fought for accommodation within the system. They've been part of the boundary authorities. They've been part of the advisors of the system. They've been part of trying to be accommodated. See, if the white people had allowed them to be part of the vote as early, as the mid 20th century, we will not be talking about the ANC having even embarked see, on a copycat kind of an arms struggle. For that matter, anyway, MK was formed and financed and controlled by the Communist Party. They never had, you say, an armed wing anyway. So that's what I'm saying. So, to say that the ANC liberated our people, when they, in themselves, you see, felt it's normal to surrender the fight for the land. See, that probably 1913 and years after 1936, they attempted to be part of that. Had it not been the Youth League, you see, in 1949, there would be no defense campaign in 1952. See, then the ANC was found in an awkward situation where they had to tell the bosses that they wanted to assimilate. So, therefore, see, for them, it has never been, say, about fighting to eradicate imperialism anyway. See, and to say now, we're moving towards the local government elections. As I said, see, the masses are given another, I would say, belief that they can change things. But the reality is that power is not in parliament. Power is not in the councils. Power is in the citadels of capital. Power is in the boardrooms. They decide what to produce. They decide for whom to produce and how they're going to appropriate, you see, the spoils of the national produce. See, because ours has been to fight for the equitable distribution of the national income, and that will not going to take place in parliament. Revolutionaries in those assemblies is to raise the voice of the voiceless, to say, indeed, there is wealth in this country, but the wealth of this country, it is not serving, you see, the advancement of the life instead of living of the people of this country. We must never fail to raise that voice, say, otherwise we would have betrayed the very principle, see, we stand for, see, isolate.
Yeah. Now, this becomes very important, because what I'm hearing from what you are saying is that you are saying the problem is the structure, the framework with which this so-called Freedom Day is based on. And I want to look into one of the settlers writing. This is the Neil Barnard, one of the settlers who was part of the negotiation process, and he was in the lead in this process. And he talks about the framework with which the constitution was established on, and he speaks on something about language, and I'm going to read this. And he says, in this framework, the constitution was adopted to recognize, and it must recognize, the language rights of the individual South Africans and the existing official status of Afrikaans and English might not be minimized in any way. And then he says, it further, this framework stated that in terms of the constitution, the African languages must be provided with the state support to develop to their full potential. The regional authority must promote multilingualism. Now, from these frameworks that I'm talking about here, I see that the supremacy of these settler languages is maintained.
Yes.
And two,
yes.
the regionalism of the colonies is also maintained. What would you say about this framework? Because this settler was in the leading forefront, and also he's talking about, what would you say before we can close off with this framework of the constitution itself in the so-called freedom of South Africa as we understand it today?
I will summarize by saying the dominant ideas in any societies are the ideas of the ruling class. And the ruling class will not be sitting with you in parliament or in councils. They determine the trend of the economy. Look at now, where the Chinese are making inroads. There's a talk of Mandarin being recognized as a language of trade and commerce. You see, the African languages have been there. The Bibles were translated using African languages. A new language of Afrikaans emerged and became the language of science and commerce and technology. See, and it means there's power behind that. See, it is not a question of sentimentalism. See, until such time that we gain that economic power, until we gain real political power, you see, it is going to be a token thing. that the African languages are going to be elevated to a status so that they deserve. So the language of the indigenous. Because Africa, as we speak today, does not belong to Africa.
Yeah. Okay. Now, thank you. Thank you, Mafrigas Thembiso Malusi. We appreciate your contribution. Mafriga, at this moment, I want to apologize to our viewers at home. We will not be able to take the comments and questions because of the issues of time, and we had to make sure that Mafrigas Thembiso Malusi is allocated sufficient time to make his contribution. However, on behalf of everybody else, because I see there on the comment section, people are saying thank you to you, Mfundis. They are saying they appreciate your contribution, and whomever that they have to love the contribution that the clergy has made, including the critique that the clergy has made towards other clergies. And this is what is good about the development of knowledge. So on the basis of that, Mfundisi, we appreciate your presence. And at this moment, I'm going to ask you to just make your final comments. I'll start with you, Comrade Malusi, to make your final comments and the message that you are giving to the masses at this on this particular day going forward. And then after that, if Mfundisi is still online with us, he will make his final contribution, final remarks, and then we will go into the announcements and we close our session. To you, Comrade Malus.
I'll close by quoting the theme of the Pastoral National Council of 1990. To fight is to survive. Not to fight is to perish. We must pick up the good fight and continue with the struggle for real freedom. Socialism in our lifetime is all it.
Africa Pokomdala, thank you very much, Nobusan. Mfundisi is still around. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Tandolwetu, and to all the viewers. I thank the Pan-Africanist Congress of the people of Azania for the manner in which you have embraced my ideas and my thoughts and the way that you have supported me from a national level. I'm supported in the Eastern Cape. I'm supported by Tsietsi in the Gauteng province and other leaders. I just wanted to thank that and to remind you of what Ulembede said on the 29th of July. That was 1944, when he said we shall achieve our liberation only when we become conscious of our divine mission. And I want to say to you, it is not in the heart of God for us to try to suffer in the manner that we do. In the book of the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11, it is God who says, for I know the plans that I have for you. Those plans are not to harm, not to destroy you, are to prosper and to give you life. It is John 10:10 who says, Christ himself says, I have come so that you may have life and have life in abundance. And ours, and as for you, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the churches and all other progressive structures, our role and duty is to wake our people from their slumber through conscientizing the masses. And there are three ways of being in slumber. It is by deep sleep, it is by sleepwalk, and it is by hypnosis. We just need to identify which slumber it is and wake up the people and tell them that the power is indeed in their hands. Thank you very much.
Siabulela, to all the guests at this moment. Mafriga, thank you very much. We appreciate your presence. All the best and have a great evening to you, Mfundisi, and to you, Mafriga Malusi Thembiso. To our viewers at home and our viewers across the board, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, thank you very much for making the time of being part of this 62nd webinar, 62nd anniversary webinar of the founding of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Today we were discussing the Freedom Day phenomena as it is understood in South Africa. And what we have heard from the discussant was that the type of leadership and the type of freedom that we have came to get at this particular time is not the real liberation or freedom that was fought for by the likes of Sobukwe, AP Mda, Jafta Masemula, Mama Sobukwe, Boniswa Ngukana, etc., etc. And therefore, on the basis of that submission, it is clear that we must continue to carry the torch of fighting. And the fight can only happen when we understand that we are our own liberators. We can't therefore place our freedom and liberation in the hands of those who have sold us a farce, a lie, an illusion, an orchestrated freedom, a type of freedom that was collaborative, not cooperative, a type of freedom that was based on wrong principles of freedom, a type of freedom that only seeks to talk to the flag, anthem, and the vote, a type of freedom that is only embedded on human rights rather than human dignity, a type of freedom that is based on capitalistic orientation. We have heard today, Africa, that the freedom that the people are celebrating in occupied Azania is not freedom at all. It is negative freedom. And at this particular moment, we must understand that this was not the case and the struggle must continue. As we are closing off, Africa, Uthandolwe Tuhlanga is going to hit the out button, and we're going to close off our session with our founding president's song at the Methodist Church, Liza Lisitinga Lakho. And we are thanking everybody for making the time. To our discussant, viewers at home, and everybody else, we still say, Africa izwe lethu. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Let's make it a prayer this morning. Make it a prayer this morning. Oh, easily, city, gala, let's make it a prayer this morning. Zonke make it a prayer this morning. Oh, Lisa, sitting alive. kade. Imfundiso zezwi lakho. Imfundiso zezwi lakho. Uze usivuselele. Sive inyaniso. Sive inyaniso ya. Jesus the praise this morning. He's so worthy.
yourself.